technology of our camera, as usual, same for Brian as for me, 12-minute limit, boom, cuts you off just as you're going. So I was just looking for symbols and explain how my tastes have changed. I used to use these really heavy, if I can find one, I don't think I've even got one in my bag anymore. This is nothing like I used to use, but I used to use heavy rides that were AAs. This is before there was an HHX range, which I now adore, or the Legacy range, or any of those sort of cymbals that are around now. I used to use like an AA version of this with a big bell, a dry body. I like to hear every bit of stick attack, and this bell that used to cut your head off. But then I was playing a lot heavier, rockier music then, and cutting through big PAs and big bands. These days, I'm totally off all of this, unless I, need an album where I need to have this really big, heavy sound and a big bell that cuts through the, a lot of middly distorted guitars. I wouldn't go near these sort of cymbals. What I use these days is, let me find something here, a gigging bag. Whoops. Right, this is my gigging set of cymbals. I'll run you through that first, actually. This is an artisan, much bigger sizes. This is a 22. It's super dark, it's super warm, it's more like an old style Turkish cymbal. You can crash it, you can ride it. It hasn't got super stick definition, but it's just got a lovely sound and sits with all the other instruments so much more. It doesn't just ping through the mix or ping with the band. When you're playing, everyone always comments on my cymbals sounding so nice and warm, and what a nice cymbal sound. That's because all my cymbals these days are flexible and a lot thinner. That's my ride. I use a 22 as my main gigging ride. Then crashes wise, I use these HAXs, which again are super thin. Look at this, you can just bend the things, and they have just got, even with your hand, I'm hardly touching that, and you can just hear this tone coming out of the cymbal. It's an amazing cymbal. I use these HAX Extreme crashes, which are fantastic, super warm. Use them in every style. They're just absolutely beautiful. On the studio kit here, I've got one HHX Extreme of 17. This is the gigging one, the live one, an 18. Sometimes I'll use the 17 with the 18, or I also use these artisan crashes. There's one on the kit there. Here's the other one to the pair. This is a slightly fuller sounding and louder cymbal. Sometimes that's nice if you just want a slightly longer decay on your cymbals and you're not using a lot of compression on the drum track. Because if your cymbals haven't got a lot of decay, a lot of compression brings out the decay in the cymbals. So those artisans are good as well. But back to my live lineup. I use a real oddball these days live. On my left side, as my main crash, I'm using a ride, which is actually a cymbal Dave Weckl got going as a ride, but I use it as a crash. It's a Legacy 20 ride. Again, it's a super thin ride, and I use that as a crash ride here, and it's a lovely cymbal. It's got a big, old, trashy sound. And then I use the 18-inch AAX on the other side. Not AAX, HHX Extreme. So that's our two live cymbals. So on the live kit, I've got two ride cymbals, and one of them's a crash, and then I also use, hang on, where is the little chap? I use a little splash. In fact, at the moment in my bag, I've got one of the old AAXs. I've just been gigging it because it's the one I've got left. An AAX splash, which is nice and quick and responsive. But as you can see in the studio here, I'm using the HHX hand hammers. The 10s I really like, and I like the 8s and the 12s as well. So I use a variety of the little splashes. What else have we got in here? Hi-hats. Now hi-hats, I'm a bit of a hi-hat sucker. I think I've got more sets of hi-hats than anybody, though I do have lots of rides. Hi-hat wise, live, I've used to use 12s and 10s and 13s. Now I'm using these big monster 15s. I love a great big set of hi-hats live. They cut through everywhere, they're always heard. They feel really responsive, and you can just get so much more out of them. You can crash them, you can ride them. They sound amazing half open, and they sound great with your foot as well. A lot of definition. Whereas in the studio, these are just a no-go area. They're too big, too loud, and they just be all over everything. Even when you mic the kit up in the studio, a lot of the time, though there's a microphone on the hi-hat, you don't use it. You tend to get plenty from your overheads. Live here, in fact, the last few tracks I'm doing, these are a set of Jojo Mayer cymbals. These were a prototype set of these, and I've been using these. These are great. They just bark in the track, and they get out of the way very quickly and don't take up too much space. And I also tend to use a lot of, let's have a look, little 13s, like here's an old set of studio hats. These are great AAXs. If I want a brighter sound and not as dark as that, I'll go for something like that. I've also got these in HH for a warmer sound. And I've got some 10s and smaller as well, depending if I want sort of special effects cymbal sounds. That's most of my cymbal choice. Oh, another thing I do like that I occasionally pull out of the bag is not that fella there. Where's this other one? This is nice. I use a really old flat ride with no bell, and sometimes if I just want a real shimmery, pure body sound that just sounds absolutely like glass, that's a fantastic cymbal. Again, it's not too thick, quite a thin cymbal. I've got a few chinas as well which I use. Last track I did with I use this little china here. It's AAX china, and it's quite an aggressive one. Again, soft and flexy, a little 16. But if I want something bigger and noisier and a real brash china, these are two of my favourites. A couple of old Carmine Pise, I think they're called, or Peach, I don't know how you pronounce his name. And they're out of a different sort of metal, like a real tinny looking aluminium metal. It looks like a lot cheaper cymbal, but they are thrashy as a couple of old dustbin lids. These are fantastic. So if you want a real thrashy sound, these are good. There are some very good new chinas, but I need to get in Sabian's vault and have a little dig around for some new sounds. I'm up for some new sounds at the moment, but I'm, to be honest, very happy with what I've got. Right, kit-wise, what else have we got? Pedals, I just use the standard Gibraltar pedals. Here's one down here. This is an old one. I can play sometimes these old, real basic models like that, which is on a cowbell sort of little setup that I sometimes use. Or I use the model up, the more modern one. You can tell I haven't used this one in a while. She's a little dusty old girl. Right, what else do you use here? Oh, let's have a little dig around. Usually always have a cowbell on my kit in case I'm playing some Latin stuff, or you just want to do something funky and just go to a different texture for a groove. Like having a cowbell on the kit. They tend to be these LP ones. I've got various sounding ones. This is a big loud one. Gigging, sometimes I use the one with the smaller mouth and a bit flatter, and that's pretty good as well. Other little gizmos I use in the kit. I tend to use little shakers like this sometimes, which are strapped to my sticks. Little jingle sets that are strapped to my sticks sometimes to just create a different texture when I'm playing, or I'll strap some of these on the hi-hats. They just go on the top of the hi-hat and you screw them down. They're great just to add a tambourine part while you're playing, especially if it's singer-songwriter style stuff and you just want to try and make all the percussion feel like it's with the kit. In fact, sometimes I even stick all the shakers and mallets and everything to the sticks and play everything with everything at once. Use brushes sometimes use these things, the Roots or the Steve Smith ones for a different softer texture on the drums. They're good as well. Other things I sometimes use is I strap these sort of things on my kit and play with these, especially if I'm doing floor tom patterns. It's a soft mallet with a shaker inside. They're also from Vic Firth. Vic makes some great stuff. He sent me a box of pretty much everything they got, and there were some fantastic toys in there that I've used a lot. These mallets especially come out a lot when I'm playing a part and I want to add the percussion as well. More in the studio. Really good studio parts for laying down tracks and textures. Right, what else is there? Down to... right. Microphones. How to mic a drum kit. Drum kit miking. That's a whole little can of worms of its own, but my favourite way, and from what the mics I've got and tried and borrowed then to get my little set of mics, is in the studio I either use a D1112 in the kick drum or a Shure Beta 52A. That's a great mic as well. On the floor tom I've got the Bayer 201, which is a dynamic microphone. Very, very directional, doesn't pick up anything off these cymbals, which is great. It literally picks up just what's in front of the mic, and it's got a lot of bottom end. Really captures the floor tom well. It's good on the snare, and it's good on the high toms, but I really like it on the floor. On the tom I use a Sennheiser 421, real standard, bog standard tom mic. A million records have been made with it. Really nice microphone on the tom. Snare drum again, couldn't get more bog standard. It's a straight Shure 57, this little fella here. It's been used on a million snare drums, and practically every recording you've ever heard, I'd say 80% of them probably have got this microphone stuck to it. Underneath I have a microphone as well, which I blend with the top microphone, and that is the Shure 57, but the 57 Beta A, which is a slightly brighter, crisper mic. That's great to balance between the snare sound and the top sound of the snare. And what main thing you do is we do record with two microphones on your snare, so you've got the contrast between the two sounds, and you can get the dynamic of the snare to the snare head. Is to use phase switching on it. You've got to flip the phase on your preamps, otherwise you get an out of phase sound and the snare sounds very thin. So whatever you do there, you've got to flip the phase on the snare drum, on one of the mics only. On the hi-hat, I've got an AKG 451, which is a real standard hi-hat condenser. It's a bog standard one that everyone uses. I'll use a 414 or 451, or a little Neumann would do the job as well. If I had the money for a Neumann, I probably wouldn't buy one because you don't actually use the hi-hat mic that often. Overheads, straight condensers. I like straight condensers. I'm going to change to ribbons, I think, when I can afford a nice set because they're warmer. But these are a little pair of condensers that are great. Positioning, it depends on your room. I've got a low ceiling room, yeah, which I've had to put a lot of dampening on and deaden my room a lot because it's acoustically not the greatest sounding room. So I've just thrown a lot of dodgy treatment all over the room till I got it to sound really nice and the kit sounds balanced in the room. Main thing with the overheads is spacing to the snare drum. So you don't get phasing problems. Make sure that you measure from the top of your microphone to the center of your snare, and then pull it over to the other side to the other one, and they should be absolutely equidistant. These spaces should be identical to the center of the snare drum, and that gives you the snare in a nice central position in the spectrum. Also, don't pan them too wide. Keep them, you know, no more than 90 degrees, or your kit will sound unnaturally wide. And also what that does is it doesn't give you a phasing problem between the microphones. The main thing with the drum kit is there's a lot of microphones and you get phasing issues which can thin your drum sound out. And if you can keep a handle on all the phasing issues within a drum kit, you will get a good sound. A lot of people use a lot of room ambience. I put a low one down, any old mic, and compress the hell out of it through a distressor to give it some real crunch and bite and aggression to the kit. But it's not the greatest sounding room, so I don't use a big stereo pair of room ambient mics here, because what I'm trying to do in this room is avoid the room ambience, because it's a small, low ceiling room, and it would just kill the drum sound. It sounds boxy and tiny.